And welcome to Hannity, and this is a Fox News alert. ISIS militants are demanding $6.6 million for the release of another American hostage that they are holding captive. Now, this hostage has been identified as a 26-year-old woman who was kidnapped 1 year ago while doing humanitarian relief work in Syria. Now, this comes after news broke last night that 33-year-old Douglas MacArthur McCain was killed while fighting for ISIS in Syria over the weekend. For the very latest, we turn to Connor Powell. He's standing by tonight in Jerusalem. Connor.
Well, Sean, it's estimated there are more than 12,000 foreign fighters like McCain in Syria and Iraq right now. U.S. intelligence officials say they're tracking 300 American citizens over there fighting side by side with militants as we speak. Now, McCain reportedly joined ISIS in the spring, and the 33-year-old Minnesota native was killed this weekend by the Free Syrian Army during a fight. His family say they were unaware of his activities. They said they spoke to him on Friday. They believed he was in Turkey. Now, intelligence officials say American militants represent a real threat to the United States. The fear is that jihadists like McCain will return to the U.S. on American passports and launch attacks. In addition to the large number of foreign fighters, one of the big reasons that U.S. officials say groups like ISIS are so dangerous is their financial strength. ISIS looking to add to the more than $1 billion in assets. The group reportedly demanding nearly $7 million in exchange for the release of another American. The unidentified 26-year-old female aid worker is the third known American in ISIS custody. ISIS, Sean, threatening to kill the woman if the U.S. doesn't pay a ransom. Sean?
All right, pretty frightening, Connor. Thank you so much for that report tonight. And tonight there are also questions that remain about the administration's approach to ISIS and whether or not the White House is downplaying the threat that, in fact, this terror group poses to our homeland. And earlier today, Fox News got its hands on the West Point Counterterrorism Journal, which includes a new assessment on ISIS and its military and intelligence capabilities. And Fox's own Catherine Herridge, she's standing by tonight in Washington. She has all the details. Catherine.
Well, thank you, Sean. The terrorist group ISIS, or ISIL, has taken a systematic and strategic approach to gain recruits and equipment, according to a new analysis in a leading counterterrorism journal. This assessment in the CTC Sentinel, published by the Combating Terrorism Center at West Point, an independent and privately funded research group, reads in part, ISIL did not suddenly become effective in early June 2014. It had been steadily strengthening and actively shaping the future operating environment for 4 years.
There's been a deliberate and very thoughtful approach to how they've built themselves up. They have armored units, they have vehicles, they have tactics, they have command and control structures. They're very well organized. It's not a bunch of terrorists running around. It's an organized militant army.
The analysis also says Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the group's leader, rebooted the organization in May 2010 and then began a multi-year campaign that took specific aim at the American-trained Iraqi security forces with car bombs and assassinations at checkpoints.
They needed to give themselves a freedom to operate, and by putting pressure on the security forces and weakening them, it gave them the freedom and the room to operate and build the organization that it has become.
With Iraqi security forces under pressure, as early as 2013, the report says trained fighters began shifting from Syria to Iraq and built on these gains. A senior Republican lawmaker says the network is battle-hardened, having learned from its mistakes during the Bush administration surge.
We know it's connected to al-Qaeda in Iraq, the former core of the Anbar province insurgency that General Petraeus helped to crush.
This week, the Pentagon acknowledged that they were not blindsided by the growing threat from ISIS and that there were multiple indicators in the intelligence that this group was gaining strength, Sean.
All right, Catherine, thank you for that report tonight. Meanwhile, as the administration begins to weigh military options against ISIS, there are reports that the president may bypass Congress and go it alone on these airstrikes. But this is not the only case where the legislative branch may be circumvented. Now, the New York Times is reporting that the White House is also pursuing an international climate change deal, but without the approval of Congress. Now, Fox's own Ed Henry, he's standing by at the White House tonight. He has the details. Ed, this more troubling talk of an imperial presidency here, that immigration, airstrikes, a lot going on the president doesn't want to consult Congress with or use them for.
Well, Sean, tonight, certainly it looks like the president's on a collision course with Congress on at least both of those issues, climate change and Syria. Syria, particularly interesting because there's kind of a growing rift potentially within the president's own party. You now have two senior Senate Democrats, Chris Murphy of Connecticut, Tim Kaine of Virginia, saying they at least want to have a debate in Congress, if not a vote, to authorize military force in Syria if the president does want to go forward with that. That's not what the White House wants to hear right now. Murphy's saying, look, this is going to be a broader fight against ISIS that could be military action throughout the Middle East, a long-term campaign, and he wants this debated out on Capitol Hill. Meanwhile, Senate Republicans are saying they want to see a strategy from the president to defeat ISIS, not just contain them, something I pressed Josh Earnest about today at the White House podium. What is the strategy then? You know, if for the president to say, we're going to root out the cancer, that's more of a slogan than a strategy, isn't it?
Well,
what does that mean, root out the cancer? How?
Well, I think that, as I've mentioned in answer to Roger's question, that the president has laid out a comprehensive strategy for dealing with the threat posed by ISIL.
Now, Ernest said that that includes military might, but also diplomatic initiatives. So while there's been a lot of hype about the potential for U.S. military action, it's not clear from the White House yet that the president is going to move forward with military action in Syria. Meanwhile, on that climate change report, you noted the New York Times saying the president might cut a deal with the United Nations, avoid a Senate vote on these climate change moves. Today, Josh Earnest tried to downplay that, said, look, if Congress is not going to act on climate change, the president's going to have to look at other avenues to move forward on this. Bottom line is, on both of these big issues, climate change and Syria, the president's at least going to take a time out on those issues Friday when he heads to Rhode Island for a fundraiser.
Hey, Ed, as the president talks about a comprehensive strategy, we'll not use the word defeat ISIS, but diplomatically, does that mean that there'd be any possibility that they might engage ISIL militants in some capacity?
Well, I think what he's referring to is they're trying to get Saudi Arabia, Jordan, other important partners in the Middle East to help in the fight against ISIS. So it's not just a U.S. fight. So this is a broader coalition. But as you know, the president has spoken out on this issue, but has not been seen publicly sort of leading a coalition. As I pressed Josh Earnest about, he gave this speech to the American Legion yesterday about, look, justice will be done. This is a cancer that's going to be rooted out. But he's not laid out what steps he wants to take to actually follow through on that. That's what Republicans and some Democrats are now saying they want to see up on Capitol Hill.
All right. Thanks, Ed Henry at the White House tonight, here with reaction to Obama's imperial presidency and much more. Nationally syndicated radio talk show host, I call him the great one, Mark Levin. Mark, ISIS has acquired more land. They have more money. They have more firepower. They are more brutal, evil, and ruthless than even al-Qaeda, if you can imagine. They said to the United States, we will see you in New York. We saw what they did to this photojournalist. They said they'll want to raise the flag of Islam in our White House. What do you make of the president's reaction or lack thereof? It seems to me that this is a situation where people have declared war against us.
You know, I want the American people to understand something, Sean. The commander-in-chief, and we only have one, is the President of the United States, and his name is Barack Obama. And these cockroaches organized, funded themselves, built a forceful military, started conquering geographic areas all around the world under his nose. He ignored it. He did nothing about it. He didn't talk to the American people about it. As a matter of fact, he downplayed it. This is one of the worst military national security screw-ups in modern American history, and he's still screwing up. Has he rallied the American people? Has he spoken to Congress? Has he asked for a declaration of war, or at least a joint resolution to fund an aggressive, offensive attack against these cockroaches? No, he hasn't. We're dealing with a very peculiar, petulant man who operates with a few advisors around him, a man who really needs as much counseling and expertise as he can get, given his very thin resume and experience record. And this is what's going on. And I'm going to tell you something else, because you've brought up a number of issues here. If this president thinks that by changing the word treaty to accord or treaty to deal, that he can violate Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2 of the United States Constitution, which involves the essential rights of the Union. That's what Governor Morris, delegate to the Constitutional Convention, said on September 8, 1787. This treaty process involves essential rights of the Union. Then this is number 1200 example of a lawless imperial president. This treaty process, they debated at length. They said, no, they don't want the House of Representatives involved. They want the Senate involved. You know why? Because they wanted the states involved in issues of sovereignty involving America. Well, that was blown away with the 17th Amendment. But still, there has never been a debate, ever, that the Senate has the right under our Constitution, granted by the people, to ratify treaties.
Agreed. And I agree they're bypassing, and I think they think they're being very clever, but this is not unusual. Work requirements for welfare have not been enforced. He didn't get his immigration bill. They didn't enforce immigration laws in the country. The same with health care. They make changes to health care. They don't go back to Congress. We have co-equal branches of government, separation of powers. He makes recess appointments, no recess. There are 3 issues on the table now where this president may dictate and not go to Congress. Airstrikes in Syria is one, immigration, and possibly even giving amnesty to as many as 6 million people, and now this climate change issue. How should Republicans deal with this?
Well, I don't know how these Republicans should deal with this. I've been arguing for a long time that the leadership is impotent and that we need more conservatives with courage to stand up to this president. But I do want to say this again to the American people. We're living increasingly in a post-constitutional period. This president is destroying the United States Congress with the help of his party, with the help of Harry Reid in the Senate, whether it's the filibuster rule, whether it's treaties or what have you. We've never seen anything like this in American history. Even Franklin Roosevelt's vice president objected, the former Speaker of the House, when he tried to pack the Supreme Court. We do not have these ethical leading Democrats anymore who are standing up to this president. This president does not want to work with Congress. He does not want to rally the American people. He wants to go it alone. He's incapable of going it alone. He's doing enormous damage to this country. He's eviscerating what's left of the Constitution. And let me be very clear about this. He is attacking American sovereignty. With this UN deal that they're talking about, with the open borders and the executive fiat that he's talking about, these are all efforts to destroy American sovereignty by Barack Obama.
Look, I agree with and you wrote this in one of your books, it's a post-constitutional America, which is a pretty frightening thought. If you really stand back and listen to the things that you're saying, it's pretty frightening. And I think he's taken this further than anybody. I don't think there's any disagreement. I know the Republicans in the House that are going forward with the lawsuit. There is the power of the purse. The one senator that tried to do something about health care using the power of the purse was Senator Ted Cruz. Isn't that the one thing, the one weapon that they can use where they have constitutional authority if, in fact, they want to combat some of these things the president's trying?
It's a power if they use it. If they don't use it, it's just words on a piece of parchment. And the fact of the matter is, within weeks of becoming Speaker of the House, John Boehner surrendered it. When it came to that continuing resolution, he said he's not going to shut down the government. Great, don't shut it down, but do you have to announce it to your adversary on the other side of Pennsylvania Avenue? Government's been shut down 20 times. I don't see where it's done enormous damage. But that said, you even have Paul Ryan coming out and saying it was a disaster. So what they've done is they have surrendered their powers. Okay, impeachment we can't talk about. The power of the purse they're not going to exercise. What the hell's left?
Yeah.
I mean, if they're not going to act like Congress, then Congress is going to be destroyed. And let me be clear, Mr. Boehner and Mr. McConnell and the Republicans, he is destroying Congress. And the Senate has been eviscerated. And none of you guys have the guts to stand up and tell the American people over and over and over again who he is and what he's doing.
All right, well said. Mark Levin, thanks so much for being with us. And still ahead, Senator John McCain will be here, but first, thank you very much for being with us.
Next time we can have a more decent conversation.
Yeah, well, you're one sick, miserable, evil SOB, but thank you for coming on anyway. He's back. I go one-on-one with London Imam Anjem Choudary, who in the past has praised the 9/11 hijackers. He's in the news yet again as there are multiple reports that Choudary has ties to the ISIS terrorists who in fact beheaded American journalist James Foley. I'll ask him to respond and more.